Hello everyone, my name is Tommy, aka Knowledge, and welcome to part 3 of my beginner's guide to Smite 2. Today we're going to be going over some very important concepts in the game. We're going to be going over damage, protections, cooldown, and items. Okay? So to get things started, we are going to go back to our ability screen. Okay? And the first part about damage I want to point out is that there are two types of damage in this game. There's physical damage and there's magical damage. Okay? There's physical damage and there's magical damage. Okay? I see people get this wrong all the time, and I don't know why, but there's only two types of damage. Okay? And your character only does one of those types of damage. So if we look at Neith here, and you click on her abilities, they're all going to say physical damage on them. Okay? But if we go to a different god, like Ra, you're going to see that all of his abilities say magical damage. Okay? So Ra is a magical damage god. Okay? And Neith is a physical damage god. You can also sort by damage type. Where is it? Yeah, physical and magical down here. Okay? So you can see all the gods that do physical damage, and you can see all of the gods that do magical damage. Okay? The next part is that these abilities scale off of two different properties, strength and intelligence. Okay? At least your damage does. Okay, I should clarify that. Your damage scales off of two factors, strength and intelligence, and your basic attack is a little bit unique in that it does scale off a third thing called basic attack power. Okay? So, you can see here, if you click on an ability, it'll say damage, and it'll just give you a number, okay? And so what this tells you is that that's just a base number, okay? And then the slashes mean that as you rank up this ability throughout the game, it'll start doing more and more damage for its base number, okay? This scaling tells you how much your strength gets multiplied and then added to the base number, okay? So at rank 1, this ability does 80 damage, but it's going to add on an additional 95% of our strength and 75% of our intelligence, okay? If we go to our second ability, we can see that at rank 1 it does 80 damage, but it scales with 80% intelligence and 55% strength. But a cool thing about Smite 2 versus Smite 1 is that other properties of your abilities can scale off of your strength and your intelligence, and other properties of like cooldown and like protections. So your abilities can scale, properties of your abilities can scale off of multiple things. Okay, so if we look here, your heal scales off of 5% of its intelligence. Okay. And then if we go to our third ability, backflip, it only scales off of intelligence. It doesn't scale off of strength at all. Okay. And then our basic attack, you can see here that it scales 100% off of strength, 20% off of intelligence, and 100% off of basic attack power. Okay. So I'm going to go over to the God builder here. I'm going to click create build. Okay. And so how do you like get strength or intelligence, right? So throughout the game, you're going to build items. Okay. So if you've seen the previous episode where we were playing some arena games, you will see that it was giving you options of what to build. Okay. And each one of these items can give you different stats on your god. Okay. So for example, if I hover over this item, it says it gives us intelligence. Okay. If I hover over a different item, it says it gives us strength. Okay. So as you build these items, you're going to get more and more strength, which is going to allow your abilities to do more and more damage. Okay. Now, where the physical and magical damage part comes in is when you are building defense. So if you're trying to go more tanky and not take as much damage, then you need to know what types of damage are coming at you from enemy characters. Okay. And so if we hover over this item here, it says it gives us physical protections. Okay. That means that it'll reduce damage coming from physical attacks, okay, but not magical. So if somebody's doing magical damage to you, this item is not going to help you take less damage from that attack, okay? If I go down to this item, it gives us both types of protections, okay? If I go to this item over here, it only gives us magical protection. It's not going to help us reduce the amount of physical damage we're taking, okay? So depending on what the enemy team has in terms of characters and gods, it helps you to determine which types of protections you should be building to take the least amount of damage possible. Okay. So in regards to this like cool scaling part, I wanted to bring up another god. That's not the right one. I wanted to bring up Baron here, okay? So Baron is a little bit unique in that I think he showcases the scaling in a unique way, because a lot of his abilities scale off of other things besides intelligence and strength. So if you look at his one here, for example, it says that his attack speed reduction scales off of 5% of your protections that you build. So by building more tanky, you can actually help reduce the amount of attack speed reduction that this ability gives. Here, on his 2, he can heal, but this heal can scale based on the amount of cooldown you have. So that's a really interesting characteristic. Based on the amount of cooldown you have, you can get more healing, okay? And then he just has some intelligence scaling on his 3, and then his ultimate has health scaling based on protections, as well as his slam scaling has intelligence scaling here as well, okay? And his auto attacks scale in the same way as Nice, okay? So that just goes to show that it's important to read the abilities of your god to understand how they scale and how the abilities change as you level them up. And so that's just important, okay? So the next thing that I want to do is go into jungle practice. So a neat tip here is that if you click on a god, down here at the bottom, you can hit enter practice and it'll throw you straight into jungle practice on the god that you ended up picking, okay? So the first thing is that if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, okay, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different little icons with numbers next to them, okay? And so these are some of the stats that your god has, okay? So I'm going to walk off the center part here, okay? So the top number is the amount of strength that your character has. The second number is the amount of intelligence your character has. The third number is the amount of attack speed, or how quickly your god can basic attack. The next number below that is the amount of physical protection you have. The fifth number is the amount of magical protection you have, and then the last number is how much movement speed you have, okay? So right now, as you can see, I have 0 strength and 0 intelligence, a little bit of attack speed, a little bit of protections, and a little bit of movement speed, okay? So what we are going to do is we're going to now open up the item store, okay? It probably looks a little bit different than compared to my previous video. I went into my settings and I changed the store and items settings to match what I have on my primary account, so it's a little bit easier for me to navigate. So if you like the look that I have, these are the settings that I'm using. Otherwise, you can feel free to mess around with the settings in here until you find something that you think you like, and you can always change it over time as you gain more experience. Okay, so we're going to open up the tab here. The first property you want to notice is that there are a bunch of tabs here on the left-hand side, okay? This is very helpful because it allows you to sort by items quickly, okay? So if I click strength, it's going to show me all the items in the game that give me strength, okay? If I click intelligence, it's going to show me all the items in the game that give me intelligence. You can select both, and it'll tell me all of the items that give me both strength and intelligence, okay? And it also sorts the items into 3 different categories, or the main items, I should say: offensive, defensive, and hybrid, okay? So when you first load into a game and you open up the item menu, okay, why is my character moving? Okay, there we go. When you first load up the item menu, there are a few base items that you need to decide right away, okay? The first one pops up here, and it's called your relic, okay? There are a bunch of different relics in this game. The ones that say that they cost 2,500 are upgrades of your relic. So you're going to be choosing from the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 base relics, okay? And each of these relics have different effects, okay? In quick play, we were always given the agility relic, but when you go into Joust or a real player versus player arena game, you're going to have these other options as to which relic you can choose, okay? And so you can read through them yourself and find out what they do. They each have a different effect. Some effects are arguably more powerful than others, but that's something that we can discuss farther down the line and that you can explore yourself. Okay, I'm just going to grab beads here as an example. The next thing you need to decide is your curio. Okay, I think in arena, if I remember correctly, don't quote, this might be incorrect, it always gives you the battle cry curio. But in other game modes, you can get like you can get meditation, and you can get the other ones. Okay, so and they're free. Okay, so you can just get one, and that's what you have. And so then it populates these slots down here. The next thing is consumables. Okay, so at the beginning of games, you are going to have less health, and your health regen and mana regen are not going to be as high as they will be in the late game once you have some items online. So in order to combat that, you can buy potions. Okay, they're pretty cheap, and what they allow you to do is regenerate either some health or some mana over time. Okay, so like the health potion regenerates a little bit of health over time, the mana potion regenerates a little bit of mana, and the multi potion regenerates a little bit of both. Okay, so these are the base potions that you can buy at the beginning of the game to, help sustain and keep yourself alive. There are also a couple of other things that you can buy in the consumable slot, which are called wards. There'll be a separate video all about wards. Don't worry about those for right now. They're only relevant in Joust and Conquest, which we haven't talked about yet. There's also the health chalice, which what it allows you to do is it's 3 health potions, but every time you back to base, you get 3 potions for free. Okay. Then there's the ward chalice, which replenishes your wards, and then there's also these 2 what are called 3K pots or elixirs that give you extra stat for a period of time. These potions are only relevant in Conquest, so we'll discuss those when we get there. Okay. Usually at the beginning of the game, you'll have enough gold to buy 3 or 4 of these usually. Okay. The next thing that you can buy is called a starter item. Okay. These are cheap items with stats that help you just kind of get your character up off the ground so that they can do some damage. They have like a little bit more stats, and also these come with a passive as well. Okay, and these starter items can be upgraded later on in the game for gold to make them more powerful as well. Okay, so you can read through these. They all have different effects, and they cater to different playstyles depending on what you're trying to do. So, for example, Selflessness and Warflag, if you're going more of a supporty or more tanky character, those can be good options. If you're going for an intelligence-based build, Conduit and Sands of Time is really good. If you're going an auto-attack character, Death's Toll and Leather Cowl can be really good. So your starter item can affect that. So I'm just going to pick up a starter item. And then we get into the main block of items. Okay, we have our offensive items, we have our defensive items, and we have our hybrid items. Okay, but these big categories right here are what are called tier 3 items. Okay, so if I click on one of these items, you can see that there's like a little branch here. Okay, so the items at the bottom are called tier 1 items, the items in the middle are called tier 2 items, and then the items at the top are called tier 3 items. Okay. So the idea is that at the beginning of the game, for sure, you won't have enough gold to buy one of these tier 3s. I mean, even throughout the game as you back to base and whatnot, you won't have enough gold to buy a full tier 3 item. So rather than not being able to build anything and improve your character, you can build one of these tier 1 or tier 2 items to help give you some more stats in that moment before you gradually work your way up to a tier 3 item. Okay. So down here, you can see all of the tier 1 items. If you click on a tier 1 item, it can tell you which tier 2 item it builds into. And then you have all of the tier 2 items. And then if you click on a tier 2, it shows you which tier 3 items it can be built into. The key part about tier 2 and 1 items is that most of them do not have a passive effect. A few do, but most of them don't. And they're just generally weak. Okay. If you click on these tier 3 items, you can see that they have a lot more stats to them. Almost all of them have some sort of passive or active effect that they can do. And so when you look at other people's builds or builds online, or when you're thinking about your own builds, we always talk about it in terms of tier 3 items, okay? They're the most powerful. And another key aspect here is that it's almost 99.9999% of the time, it is better to just go for a tier 3 item and then go for the next tier 3 item and go for the next tier 3 item. You don't want to be filling up your inventory with a bunch of tier 1 and 2s. Almost always. You want to be, getting your couple of tier 2s and then upgrading to that tier 3 before you move on to building any more tier 1s or tier 2s. Okay. So that's a mistake that if you're new to, that's a definitely a mistake that if you're new to the game, I can definitely see a lot of people making, okay? So always go for one tier 3 item and then go to the next tier 3 item and then keep going, okay? So there are offensive items that give you strength and intelligence, and usually some other combination of stat. Okay, so like Gem of Focus gives you intelligence and it gives you cooldown. It also can give you a little bit of movement speed. Okay, Hydra's gives you cooldown, strength, mana, and mana regen. Okay. There's also critical chance, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this video. And you can also see that the items range from like a lot of gold, 3,700 gold, to not very much, 2,250 gold. Okay, and so usually the more expensive the item, the better it is. Usually, that's not always true. I mean, I'll just say it's not always true, because if I say it is true, then you can fall into bad habits and traps. So I don't want to say that. Okay, and then same with the defensive items. There's a scale, and then hybrid items there's a scale. So again, offensive items tend to allow you to do more damage. Defensive items usually have protections on them, whether it's physical or magical. They also have, other stats like health and cooldown on them as well, but their primary focus is on protections. And then hybrid tends to give you an in-between, right? It'll give you like less protections than a defense item, but it'll also give you some amount of strength or intelligence as well. So that's important to keep in mind. Okay, so as you start playing games, right, and you start getting used to the items and what they do, we'll talk about full builds later when we talk about specific roles and how to build tanky and how to build damage and whatnot. But that's going to be for another video. The other thing, though, that I do really want to mention is how penetration and protections work in this game. Okay. It's not as simple as like one protection prevents one physical damage. It's much more complicated than that, okay? And there's also different forms of penetration, okay? So if you look at Titan's Bane, right, it says 35% penetration, okay? And you're probably like, okay, what does that actually mean? That's a good question. We'll get there in a second, right? And then there's like Totem of Death, which gradually gives you more penetration as it ramps up, but it also uses the term reduces protections instead of penetration, which is a little bit weird. And then there's Oathsworn, which just gives a flat number. It's not a percentage. Okay. So we're gonna hop out of the game here for a moment, and we're gonna show you some graphs. Okay. I know that not everybody likes numbers, but it's important to understand a general trend here and why certain things are important to build or not build. And I mean, you don't need to focus on specific numbers, but it's important to get a general trend, okay? So the first thing that I want to bring up is that if you are coming in from Smite 1, you are used to a stat called percent cooldown, okay? That stat does not exist in Smite 2, okay? If you're a new player, if you're a completely new player to Smite, and you're like, wait, what the hell is talking about? Don't worry about it. We'll break it down. But if you're coming in from Smite 1, this is going to be a change for you, okay? Instead of percent cooldown, there is something called cooldown rate. Okay, so if I go back to the game real quick and I go to cooldown rate, you'll see that some items have 20 cooldown rate, some have 10, some have 25. So usually they come in chunks of 10. It's like 10, 20, 30, but there is the occasional item that gives you like 25 or 15 or some odd number of cooldown rate. Okay, and so what I have here is a graph of how cooldown rate converts to percent cooldown, okay? So in this middle formula right here, we have 100 minus 100 over 100 plus x times 100, okay? So x is the amount of cooldown rate that you have, and the resulting graph is the percent cooldown, okay? So as you can see, when you have 0 cooldown rate, you have 0% cooldown, okay? Your ability cooldowns are not going to be reduced by any percentage, okay? But then as we go up, so once we get to about 10 cooldown rate, we're at about 9% cooldown, okay? Give or take. And then as we get to 20 cooldown rate, we're at about 16% cooldown, okay? And so usually you're not getting more than 50 cooldown rate in a game unless you're going for some really specific strategy or doing something a little bit out of the ordinary. And so 50 cooldown rate corresponds to about a 33% cooldown reduction, or about a third of your total cooldown time being reduced. Okay. Keep in mind that in Smite 1, the highest percent cooldown that you could ever reach, because it was hard capped, was 40%. Okay, so to get to 40% cooldown in this game, you would need almost 66 cooldown rate. Okay, which is a lot. Okay, so cooldown has been substantially reduced in this game, in Smite 2. The important trend that I want to that like, if you're not a numbers person, right? The important trend here is that as you buy cooldown rate, the less effective it is. So what do I kind of mean by that, right? Is that initially, as you buy cooldown, like each cooldown rate when you initially buy it from 0 is going to jump you up a lot more than buying it out here at the end. Okay, so it's something called diminishing returns, where the more you buy of something, the less gain you get. Okay, so that's a qualitative relationship that you should understand. Okay, is that a little bit of cooldown is going to be much more valuable. Well, I was about to actually say something incorrect, so let's not say that. But yeah, just look at the general trend, and then there's some specific numbers in here. Okay. So now we're going to go take a look at how protections and penetration and damage work, okay? So I'm going to put up this graph right here, okay? And so this is percent damage, okay? So we're using this top formula right here, 100 over 100 plus x times 100, okay? So if you have 0 protections, you'll take 100% damage from whatever source, okay? So if you remember at the beginning of the video, we saw a base number plus some amount of strength plus some amount of intelligence, right? So if you have no protections, you're going to take 100% of that number, okay? But as you start building protections, the amount of damage from that ability or auto attack or whatever is going to decrease, okay? And it decreases in this sort of fashion, okay? Where initially, as you buy protections, the amount of damage that you take is going to go down quite a bit. But then as you build more protections out here at the edge, its effectiveness per protection is reduced. Okay. And so that's important to keep in mind. Now, also keep in mind is that it is impossible to get to 0 protections in this game. If we go back to the game real quick, right? You can see that on the right-hand side, I'm at level 1 right now, and I already have some protection, some physical and some magical protections, right? And now if I increase my level, you can start to see that the stats on the right-hand side start going up. So my attack speed goes up, my protections go up, and then I'm going to walk out of base here real quick, because I think... let's see, let me reset to level 1. Hang on, I've got a speed buff on me real quick. I want to show you how the movement speed gets affected by this. Okay, that's off. So yeah, so when we level up, we gain attack speed, and we also gain protections. Okay, and it always goes up until we hit level 20. Okay, so here we are. We have hit level 20. Okay, so you can see that your strength and intelligence, those offensive stats, don't scale up when you level up, but your attack speed, your physical protection, and your magical protection do. Okay, this is very important, because if you are fighting somebody who is ahead of you in levels, they are just inherently going to have more defense than you and are going to take less damage from you. Okay, so that's an important piece of the game to recognize, is that if you are down in levels, you are inherently going to do less damage to somebody who is the same level as you. Okay. So let's go back to the graphs here, right? So this was the graph right here. Okay. Now I'm gonna put up another graph. Where Oh, there it is. Okay. So we have this bottom equation here. Okay. And what this does is it takes into account if somebody is hitting you and they have penetration, and if they have flat percent penetration, and if they have flat penetration. Okay. So let's go back to the game real quick. And we'll go open up the item store. And if we hit penetration, okay, so these items provide penetration, okay? First off, there is only one item in the game that can provide flat penetration, and it is Oathsworn Spear, okay? All these other items provide some sort of percent reduction, okay? And the items like Executioner and Totem of Death scale up as you hit enemy gods. The Obsidian Shard and the Titan's Bane is just a constant amount no matter when or how often you're hitting them. And then Void Shield and Void Stone scale based on how close you are to the player who has this item. Okay. So if we go back to our graph here, okay, so P is our percent penetration. Okay, so you can see that as we apply percent penetration, the curve kind of bounces upwards, right? And what that means is that as you build more and more penetration, people are going to take more damage. Okay, that's good. And so, for example, if we go to 35% penetration, which is what's on Obsidian Shard and Titan's Bane, two very common percent penetration items in the game, you can see like the curve goes up like a noticeable amount, right? So what does that mean? It means that penetration, if you are a damage dealer, is a very, 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 I cannot understate this, very valuable stat, okay? And then if we add in some flat penetration, okay, you can see that the curve goes up even more, okay? So keep this in mind, right? Penetration is valuable. It allows you to bypass protections and do more damage, okay? Now, if you're a tank, right, you should also be aware of this, and that, yes, you are going to be building defense, right, but that damage dealers are going to be building penetration to try to get around your defenses, okay? So as a tank, right, it's not necessarily always beneficial to just build straight up protections. It can also be helpful to have health, because health is just a number, right? And it is not bypassed in the same way that protections are. There are items in the game that do damage based on the max health. So let me find a couple of examples of that. Soul Reaver is one of them, where depending on the difference in health between the two players, it does some amount of damage. There's also Kinsblade that does that. I thought there was another one, but Heartseeker. There we go. Heartseeker does percent health damage. Let's see. So we talked about consumables. We talked about starters. We have strength and intelligence. That's how your damaging abilities scale. So attack speed just affects how quickly you can basic attack. It doesn't affect your abilities. I don't think there's any ability in the game that scales based on how much attack speed you have. I don't think that's true. Lifesteal. So lifesteal is another stat. So what lifesteal does is whenever you hit something, another god, another minion, I think it only works on gods, jungle camps, and minions. It doesn't work on towers. It does work on objectives, but doesn't work on towers, where when you hit them, you can get a little bit of health back, okay? So that can be valuable, like if you're fighting for a long time and you're slowly like gaining some of the health back, that can be valuable. And there are certain gods that their abilities really synergize well or scale off of lifesteal. So that can be a good item to go with. So critical chance, what critical chance does is it allows you to get critical hits, okay? And usually this comes up on auto attacks. There are certain abilities in the game that can critically hit, but that's very dependent on the god, and it's not very many. So again, read your god's ability description in the menus so you can know if your ability can critical hit or not. So you get a percentage of critical chance. So if you have a lower critical chance, then it's less likely you'll get a critical hit. If it's higher, it's more likely you'll get a critical hit. There is also a like smoothing out function so that if you have like low attack speed, it isn't like super random that you get a hit. So for example, if you miss like 3 crits in a row, you're more likely to get a crit on your next auto attack if you have some crit chance. Okay. By default, if you get a critical hit, it does 1.75 times the amount of normal damage it would do. And then if you build Deathbringer, it can increase that. Even more. Okay. But there are also items in the game like Spectral Armor, which can decrease the amount of damage from critical strikes. Okay. That's critical chance. We talked about penetration. We talked about protections. We talked about magical protections. Max health, so you can build health. There's also health regen, so that you can regenerate more health. You can regenerate health more quickly. So that can be helpful if you take a bunch of damage, then you can kind of like go hide or move away and then heal up, and then you can come back. There's also mana. So in the first video, we talked about mana, where you need mana to cast your abilities. So if you are using up your mana, having more of it can be good. And there's also mana regen, to where you can just regenerate your mana more quickly. The thing I will say about mana is that it's more of a concern in the early game on certain characters where you might run out of mana, but usually by the late game, it isn't that big of a concern. And your mana and health regen also increase as you level up your god. So while I didn't showcase that as I was leveling up my character, you might have noticed that it was also going up. And then there's cooldown rate, and so I showed you how to convert cooldown rate into percent cooldown. There's also anti-heal. So if you're playing against healing characters or characters that have healing abilities, these are items to possibly consider. And then there's the last 2 categories of items. Okay, so in all the items that I've showed you so far, there's another breakdown of them besides offensive, defensive, and hybrid, and that is passive and active. Okay, so passive items, what they do is that they just have a passive effect. Okay. It just exists on the item, and it's always there to be used. Okay. Active items, on the other hand, what they do is they have they're basically an extra. I'll use the word ability. They're basically an extra ability. So, for example, if I build Dagger of Frenzy here, for example, if it'll let me. Oh, I'm not in the base. Okay. Whoops. Make sure you're in the base to buy items. You can see down below I get another button, and it's an X button. Okay, and if I hit it, what it does is it gives my next 6 auto attacks extra damage, and they shoot faster. Okay, so that can be very useful because I can catch somebody off guard and do a lot more damage to them a lot more quickly than they might be expecting. Okay, there's other active items that can like regen your team's health, that can make your team move faster. There's active items that can debuff the enemy team. There's active items that can give you shields. And like your relic, for example, is basically an active item. Because it's like an extra button that you can press. The key thing about active items is that you can only hold up to a maximum of 3 in your build. You cannot go more than that. So, for example, if I build my second one here, right, you can see that it'll pop up and my keybinds will change. But the key thing to note is that if you build your third active item, you can see that my like ward thing went away at the bottom right. It still shows in my inventory, but in the bottom right it's not there. That means you can't use it anymore because the third active item took over your curio slot. So if you want to get your curio back, you'd have to, I think, if you sell your item, you can use the curio again, but it's not showing up. That might be a bug. So Hi-Res, if you're watching this, I think that might be a bug. The other thing, though, is I will say selling items is, again, 99% of the time a bad idea because, so for example, I'm going to buy this Phoenix Feather for 2,400 gold. It only sells for 1,600. So you're losing gold by selling items. Really, the only time you should be selling items is that in the late game, if you realize, like, oh, I really, like, need something else, you can sell it. but you're almost always better off just leaving the item in your inventory and then building the next item that you're like, oh shit, I should have gone that. Just build that item next. Okay. Because that'll just set you very far behind because you're losing 800 gold effectively. Which is not good. Let's see here. The next thing I wanted to talk about was crowd control. Okay. So let me get out of this jungle practice. Okay. So if you go into the ability tab on your god, so we'll go back to Neath here. And I click on Spirit Arrow, right? In addition to its damage, it says it roots. Okay. What is that? Well, a root is a form of crowd control. Okay. If you go to the backflip, it says it slows. Okay. Well, that's again another form of crowd control. If we go to who's a good option for this? Sobek, right? It says it stuns and then like makes you CC immune and displacement immune. It's like, well, what does that mean? There's displaced. There's slowing. Let's see, there's another one I want to show you. For example, Fenrir. There's a pickup / grab. There's a stun. Okay, these are all forms of crowd control. So in addition to your ability doing damage, it can also have other effects that it does. It can heal you, for example. It can like reduce your cooldowns, but it can also apply forms of crowd control. Okay, so what crowd control is it's a mechanic that inhibits your character from performing some sort of action. Okay, so I'm going to move over my notes here real quick. We're just going to go through forms of crowd control, and I'm going to give you some examples of abilities that apply this specific type of crowd control. So if you want to go see it in jungle practice or look it up, you can. Unfortunately, Smite 2 doesn't have videos for abilities in the menu screen, so that's a little bit unfortunate. So crowd control. Okay, we're going to start with hard crowd control. Okay, so there's two different forms of crowd control. There's hard crowd control and there's soft crowd control. What hard crowd control is it completely disables you from using certain attacks or abilities. Okay, like you can't use them at all. You'll try to hit a button for an ability and it'll just, it'll give you the noise and you won't be able to use it, or you'll hit the auto button and no auto attack will come out. Okay, so I looked up online and I went through because I thought the list online was incorrect, where there was a couple missing, and I tried to put in every form of crowd control that's currently in the game. Okay, as new gods are added to the game, this list, there might be additional additions to this list, but I just briefly want to go through all of the forms of crowd control and give you an example of an ability that has that effect on it, so that if you want to go look at the ability menu, you can go see it, and then if you want to try it out or see how it works in jungle practice, you can, even though in jungle practice it's kind of hard. It might be best to look up a video or, just wait for you to get hit by it and you'll kind of see what it does. Okay, so the first form of hard crowd control is a disarm. The best example of this is Bellona's 3. So if Bellona hits you with her 3, you are not going to be able to basic attack for however long the duration of that disarm lasts. Okay. Fear, the best example of this is Hades 2. What it does is it forces you to turn away from the god and you lose a bunch of movement speed and you slowly like walk away from the god. Okay. Mesmerize, what it does is it stuns you, so it just prevents you from moving. But if you are dealt damage, the effect ends and then you can move. Okay, the best example of this is in Apollo 2. We'll jump down here to stun real quick because Mesmerize mentioned stun. You're just locked in place. You can't move, you can't use abilities, you can't use a relic, you can't use an item. You're just stuck until the duration expires. Okay. The best example of this is Achilles 1, but a lot of gods have stuns on them. It's a pretty common form of crowd control. Polymorph, the best example of this is Carnunos' ult. What happens is you'd like transform into like a boar or another animal, and then you can't use abilities or basic attacks for however long you're transformed into that animal. It's a unique form of crowd control. It's not very common, but it is one that you should be aware of. Root, best example of this is a Kepri 3. cannot walk, but can use movement abilities. Okay, so you can't like move your character, but if you have like something that allows you to like jump or dash, you can use those. Okay. A silence, the best example of this is Thanatos' 3. You cannot use abilities, relics, or consumables. Okay, but you can still basic attack. So that's the key thing there, right? Is that a silence, you can't use your abilities, relics, or consumables, but a disarm, you can't use your basic attacks. So they, you know, work in similar ways. A taunt, the best example of this is Athena's 2. You're forced to face the character that taunted you, and you slowly walk in towards them. And then there's a banish, which removes gods from combat temporarily. The best example of this is Janus's 1. And then there is displace. Okay, so there's a bunch of different forms of displace, but they're all considered displacements. So for example, there's a grab. The best example of this is Mercury's 3, where you just like get grabbed onto and like you can't move or use actions. There's also knock back, where you just get pushed backwards. The best example of this is an on her 2. There's also a knock up. So a knock up is you get launched in the air, and the duration of the knock up is roughly correlated to how high in the air you get flung up. Also, some abilities with a knock up allow you to still do damage to the god in the air, but some don't. But sometimes you can only do damage with certain abilities or with basic attacks, but not other abilities. It's complicated how the knockup and which knockups allow you to actually do damage to people. So that's something you'll have to experiment with. Okay. There's also a pickup, which is the best example. This is a Fener out where he like bites onto you and, you know, puts you in his mouth. There's a pull. The best example of this is a Sylvanas 3, where you just get pulled in towards the god. And then there's also a push. The best example of this is a Hercules 1. A knock back and a push are fairly similar, but in the game, I think there's a difference in how they're applied or whatnot. Okay, so those are the hard forms of crowd control. Again, these completely disable your ability to use either abilities, basic attacks, or your relic. And so any individual one of these is usually going to be more harmful to you than any of these forms of what we're about to go over, which is soft crowd control. Okay, and soft crowd control, what it does is it impairs or hinders rather than completely disables something. Okay, so for example, a blind, what just impairs your vision temporarily, and the best example of that is a Raw 2. Okay, there's also a cripple, which just makes it so you can't use movement abilities. So if you have a dash or a leap, you can't use it, but you can still just walk away. Okay, and the best example of this is the Ares 1. Okay, then there's the intoxication. The only god that this is on right now at the moment, I believe, is Bacchus and on his ultimate, and it just makes you like move kind of weird, and your vision kind of gets messed up a little bit. And then there's a slow. What a slow does, it just reduces your movement speed. Okay, and the best and an example of this is in an Anubis 3. Slow is by far the most common form of crowd control in the game, okay? But the amount of slow depends on the ability that hit you. It also depends on how many abilities with a slow hit you, okay? So if you get hit by an ability with a slow, and then you get hit by another ability with a slow, there's some convoluted, I mean, I shouldn't say convoluted, but there's some formula as to what the effect of slow then is, right? It doesn't like, at like 50%, if you get hit by 50%, then you get hit by another 50%, it doesn't go to like 100% and like stun you, then you wouldn't be able to move, right? There's some multiplication that takes place that, you know, makes it so that maybe you're only slowed for like 80% or something like that, okay? I didn't put the formula up here because I feel like it was needlessly complicated, because if you're getting hit by multiple slows, you're not going to be moving, and that's quickly going to become a problem that you're going to have to react to, okay? If you just get hit by like 20% slow, it's not going to be that big of a deal. You might barely even notice that you were affected, okay? Another form of soft crowd control is a tremble. The best example of this is Cabrakan 3. It kind of like intoxication, just kind of makes your movement kind of a little bit weird. And then there's a vortex. The best example of this is on Merlin's 1 in his void stance, where it can, you know, suck you in, but you can still like walk out of it. Okay. So that is going to be all for this video. In this video, we covered how damage works, how it scales, and how it can be applied to enemy gods. We talked about protections and how defense reduces the amount of damage that you take. We talked about crowd control and all of its different forms. And we also went through the item store and talked about the different categories of items and how by building items, you can gain certain stats. And we also talked about how when you level up your god, certain stats increase over time and how that can be beneficial to you in the game. So thanks everyone for watching. I hope you learned something and had a good time. If you're a new player, feel free, if you have any questions, to leave a comment down below. Also, if you're a new player, feel free to share this with one of your friends. And if you think I said something incorrect or if you have a good tip, feel free to leave that in the comments below as well. Don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe, and I will see you in part 4.